Did you know that German students study current U.S. propaganda? The same propaganda that's shaping America into what it's becoming today. In this video, I'm going to go through a chapter of one of those textbooks used in the German courses and look at the myths, especially the national myths, that play a powerful role in shaping how U.S. Americans see themselves and their future. In the U.S., these myths are more than just stories. They've become tools of propaganda designed to inspire trust, confidence, and unity in specific ideals about what America's place is in the world. Hi, I'm Allie, and I combat U.S. propaganda. With 15 years of experience as a college-level educator and academic researcher in communications, I aim to deconstruct much of the rhetoric that we're taught in the United States about America. I moved to Germany 5 years ago, and since then I've used my experiences to discuss these topics. Before we dive in, I want to acknowledge that this video might bring up some strong emotions, and that's okay. It happens to me too. It's natural to feel uncertain when ideas are challenged, so take your time to process and feel free to ask questions in the comments. Let's explore this together. First, let's take a look at the melting pot myth. This is the myth of America as a melting pot, a land where all cultures blend together harmoniously. It has become a cornerstone of U.S. identity. The Melting Pot was a play that debuted in 1908 in Washington, D.C. It depicted America as a place where immigrants could assimilate into a unified national identity. At the time, plays were a dominant cultural medium, often shaping public opinion and sparking national debates, as they provided a shared space for engaging with contemporary social issues. The play gained significant attention when President Theodore Roosevelt attended its premiere. He endorsed it as a great play. However, its vision was limited. It focused primarily on European immigrants and largely excluded other significant groups, such as African Americans, Native Americans, and Asian immigrants, from its narrative. The play also avoided addressing the complexities of immigration at the time. Instead, it presented an oversimplified view of assimilation that erased the realities of cultural retention and systemic inequalities. However, it popularized the melting pot metaphor into much of how we communicated about it today. However, German students study how this narrative often ignores contradictions in U.S. immigration history and modern-day immigration debates. For instance, the United States was, in many ways, founded on illegal immigration. Early settlers, including the Pilgrims, occupied land without the consent of indigenous peoples. Colonization wasn't about adhering to borders, but about disregarding them entirely in the pursuit of land, resources, and opportunity. In these courses, German students analyze texts like this excerpt from the New York Times by William Hodgland. Perhaps no aspect of the immigration experience is more quintessentially American than our long heritage of illegal immigration. You wouldn't know it from the immigration debate going on today, but America's pioneer values developed in a distinctly illegal context. In 1763, George III drew a line on the map stretching from modern-day Maine to modern-day Georgia, along the crest of the Appalachians. He declared it illegal to claim or settle a land west of this line, all of which he reserved for Native Americans. Immigrants from Germany and Ireland violated the laws and settled where they pleased. Without their daring disregard for immigration laws, we might not be here today. German students are then asked to compare history like this with modern immigration debates, including discussions about the Mexican border. Today, immigrants are framed as either economic assets or threats, depending on their perceived contribution to or strain on the economy. This creates a sharp contrast with the romanticized melting pot myth, which presents America as a beacon of inclusivity. Immigrants work in areas that rely on cheap labor, like the construction business and restaurants. Their illegal status makes it impossible for them to rise and leave the underclass of the poor. Finally, students analyze the symbolism of the Statue of Liberty, which, quote, celebrates U.S. political values as a force for the betterment of humanity, as well as the bond of friendship among freedom-loving nations. So quotes like these are then analyzed against the reality that economic imperatives have often driven immigration policy. German students see how the romanticized narrative of the melting pot contrasts with racial and economic hierarchies while presenting America all the while as a land of opportunity. The text also looks at cultural assimilation pressures. The U.S. melting pot myth often masks the expectation that immigrants are expected to assimilate into the dominant culture. Instead of celebrating diversity, this myth can pressure individuals to abandon their cultural identities to fit in, perpetuating the idea that American identity is monolithic. German students examine this by reading texts that detail the experiences of immigrants and then are asked to consider questions like whether adopting the practices of another religion or culture is really necessary or desirable. Teachers are also encouraged to explain concepts like assimilation and acculturation, helping students understand the layers of cultural pressures that are embedded within this melting pot narrative. This analysis prompts critical thinking about whether the expectation to blend in erodes the value of cultural diversity. Now let's take a look at these propaganda techniques in action. While the melting pot myth may seem like a historical narrative, propaganda techniques used to perpetuate it remain highly relevant today. Let's analyze how contemporary political propaganda, media framing, and public messaging reinforce this myth and its associated ideals. One example is the term dreamer. It refers to undocumented immigrants brought to the U.S. as children. It's tied to the DREAM Act, which aimed to give them a pathway to legal status if they met certain criteria, like completing school or serving in the military. The term evokes hope and resilience, tying dreamers to the ideals of the American dream and the melting pot. But it also highlights their exclusion from full citizenship, showing how access to these myths is limited. Dreamers are celebrated for their potential, but then denied equal rights, revealing the contradictions within these narratives. Now let's look at some concrete examples from contemporary political rhetoric. Immigration debates often show how politicians manipulate this melting pot myth. In 2024 campaign ad, Trump declared Kamala was in charge of Biden's open border policies, giving welfare to illegals while Americans struggle. The use of the term illegals here dehumanizes undocumented immigrants, reducing their identities just to their immigration status. It reinforces the idea that some groups, those who fail to conform to legal or cultural standards, exist outside of the bounds of the American identity. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris's 2024 campaign highlighted her toughness on border security, alongside a personal narrative of being raised by an immigrant mother. In her 2024 campaign, stated, "The border state prosecutor, she took on drug cartels and jailed gang members for smuggling weapons and drugs across the border. As vice president, she backed the toughest border control bill in decades. And as president, she will hire thousands more border agents and crack down on fentanyl and human trafficking." At the same time, another ad ran that said, "When you're raised by an immigrant mother, you learn what's possible with determination." While this rhetoric may seem more inclusive, it subtly illustrates how political rhetoric has to navigate the contradictions inherent with these melting pot and American dream myths. These ads struggle to reconcile toughness with compassion, inclusion with exclusion, and idealism with being pragmatic. However, the conditional acceptance remains central, revealing that persistent tension between America's aspirational identity as a nation of immigrants and its reality of selective inclusion. Now let's look at media framing in news and entertainment. News outlets often frame immigration through a binary lens of opportunity versus threat. Coverage of border crisis frequently highlight images of chaos and overwhelmed systems, reinforcing fears about immigrant populations. By understanding these complexities, German students learn how propaganda shapes not only just our nation's identity, but its policies and individual attitudes. The melting pot myth inspires and controls, maintaining an image of openness and opportunity while selectively deciding who gets to participate in the American dream. By understanding these complexities, we can also see how propaganda shapes not just national identity, but also the lived realities of immigrants and native-born citizens. And this leads us to the next discussion. Why is America's working poor still believing in the American dream? But that's for the next video.